The Hall of Embers was built to make people feel small. Elira Vane understood that the moment she crossed its threshold. By the end of this hearing, she would no longer exist in this city, not as a scholar, not as a citizen, not as anything that mattered. The ceiling rose like a stone sky, layered with blackened arches and veins of red crystal that caught the torchlight and scattered it across the walls like restrained fire. Pillars carved with the history of the realm lined the floor in two rigid rows, each one bearing the likeness of a former ruler or fallen general. Their stone eyes watched in silence, judgment preserved in granite. At the far end of the hall, elevated by 7 wide steps of obsidian, stood the dragon throne. It was not shaped like a beast. It was a seat of dark iron and crimson enamel, sharp-lined and severe, forged centuries ago when the dragon crown was first bound to a human ruler. Above it hung the banner of the realm, black cloth threaded with gold, marked by a sigil of flame enclosed in a circle. Authority, not spectacle. Power, not myth. Seated upon the throne was King Aurelian Draveth. He did not move. His posture was straight, his hands resting calmly on the armrests, fingers still. His dark hair was pulled back, his crown thin and unadorned, its only gem a single ember-red stone at the center. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not warm, simply present. By law, the Dragon King did not interrupt council proceedings, even when the council was wrong. Below him, the court waited. Nobles in layered silk stood shoulder to shoulder. Advisors in muted robes lined the sides. Guards in black and bronze armor flanked the walls, spears upright, faces forward. Even the servants had paused, trays forgotten, eyes lowered but ears open. At the center of the hall, alone on the polished stone floor, stood a woman. Her name was Elira Vane. She did not kneel, not because she had not been commanded to, but because she had not been given the chance. "Let it be entered into record," Chancellor Morcant said, his voice echoing clearly through the hall, "that Elira Vane, formerly of the Eastern Archives, stands accused of overreach, insolence, and presumption beyond her station." The word formerly landed like a blade. Elira felt it, though she did not react. Her hands were clasped behind her back, fingers pressed together so tightly her knuckles ached, a private rebellion no one could see. She kept her chin level, her gaze fixed not on the throne, but on the floor just beyond it, respectful, distant, controlled. She wore no silk. Her dress was plain charcoal gray, the kind worn by scholars and record-keepers. Carefully cleaned, mended at the cuffs, pressed flat. She had made sure of that. Dignity, even now, mattered. Around her, the hall murmured, not loudly, not openly, but whispers traveled faster than fire. "That's her? I expected someone older. Isn't she the one who—" She had no right. She should be grateful she wasn't imprisoned. Elira heard none of it distinctly, yet she heard all of it at once. The sound pressed in from every side, a low, breathing judgment. She could feel eyes on her, curious, amused, disapproving. She did not look for allies. There were none here. "Your actions," Morcant continued, "demonstrate a clear misunderstanding of your place within the Crown structure. You accessed sealed records without approval. You addressed the council without invitation. And most gravely," he paused. The pause was deliberate. "You presume to interpret legacy matters reserved for the Dragon King himself." A sharper reaction rippled through the court. Legacy matters were not merely historical disputes. They shaped succession, authority, and the myths that held the realm together. If mishandled, they could fracture the crown itself. Several nobles exchanged looks. One woman near the front allowed herself a thin smile. Another did not. Elira's chest tightened. Not fear, not panic. Restraint. She had known this moment would come the instant she stepped forward 3 weeks ago, parchment in hand, voice steady as she spoke truths the council had buried for decades. She had known the cost. Knowing did not make standing here easier. "Do you deny these charges?" Morkant asked. Illyra lifted her eyes, not to the chancellor, to the space between the pillars where the hall stretched outward, where the truth had first echoed and been swallowed. "No," she said, her voice carried, clear, unshaking. "I do not deny them." A ripple moved through the court. Some had expected protest, excuses, pleas. They got none of it. High above, the Dragon King's gaze lingered, just a fraction longer than necessary. Morkant's brows lifted faintly. "You admit fault?" "I admit action," Illyra replied. "There is a difference." A sharp intake of breath sounded to her left. "Careful," Morkant warned. "I am," she said quietly. Silence followed. Morkant folded his hands. "Very well. Then let us be precise. You were entrusted with the Eastern Archives, a position of service. Instead of fulfilling that duty with humility, you sought recognition, influence. You attempted to elevate your voice above those who rule." "That is not true," Illyra said. The words escaped before she could stop them. The hall stilled. She closed her eyes for a single breath, then opened them again. "I did not seek elevation. I sought correction." "Correction?" Morkant scoffed. "You are not qualified to—" "I was trained," she said evenly. "For 12 years. I memorized the codes. I cataloged the legacy texts. I cross-referenced the succession records. The discrepancies were not subtle." "You were not asked." "No," Illyra agreed. "I was not." A low chuckle sounded near the right pillar. "That," Morkant said sharply, "is precisely the point." He turned, projecting his voice. "This is not a matter of knowledge. It is a matter of obedience, of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent." Illyra felt the weight of it then, not the accusation, the dismissal. "You were useful," Morkant continued. "You were diligent. But usefulness does not grant authority, and diligence does not excuse arrogance." Her usefulness. Past tense. A few nobles nodded. Relief passed through the room. The structure would hold. Illyra said nothing. "Therefore," Morkant declared, "by order of the council, you are hereby stripped of your post, barred from the archives, and removed from all advisory consideration. You will vacate the capital by dawn." The murmur this time was louder. Exile, not execution, not imprisonment. Removal, social death. Illyra drew in a slow breath. She focused on the stone beneath her feet, on the steady rhythm of her heart. This was the moment they wanted her to break. She would not give it to them. "Do you have anything further to say?" Morkant asked, already moving on. "Before this judgment is carried out?" Illyra hesitated. Not because she feared the answer, because she knew what it would cost. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, past the council, past the watching nobles. For the first time, she looked directly at the dragon throne, at the man seated upon it. King Aurelian met her eyes. His gaze was steady, assessing, unmoved, and yet focused. "I do," she said. A hush fell so complete even the torches seemed to quiet. "I was born in this city," Illyra said. "I was raised under its laws. I served its records faithfully. When I found inconsistencies in the legacy accounts, I did what I was trained to do. I followed the truth." Morkant's lips thinned. "I did not fabricate," she continued. "I did not steal. I did not lie. I presented what was already written, by hands long dead, by rulers long praised." She paused. "If that is arrogance," she said, "then it is not mine alone." Unease rippled through the hall. "Your Majesty," Morkant began. King Aurelian did not respond. He did not raise a hand. He did not speak. The silence stretched. Illyra felt it then, not hope, but something stranger. Attention. The king's gaze sharpened, not with emotion, but intent. The council finds this statement noted, Morcant said at last. It changes nothing. He gestured toward the guards. Escort her out. Boots echoed as two guards stepped forward. This was the peak, the moment. Elira shifted her weight, preparing to walk under her own power. Then she noticed it. One of the guards hesitated, just a fraction of a second. His eyes flicked. Not to Morcant, not to the council, but upward, toward the throne. Elira followed the glance. King Aurelian had not moved, but his fingers, resting on the armrest, had curled slightly. Not a command, not a signal, just tension. His gaze had dropped from her face to her hands, to the faint ink stains along her fingers, to the scars earned from years of brittle parchment and iron clasps. Marks of someone who worked, not performed. Something unreadable passed behind his eyes. Elira Vane, Morcant said, already turning away. You are dismissed. Dismissed, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Elira straightened. She did not look back. She took one step forward. High above, the Dragon King watched her go, and for the first time since the proceedings began, he did not look bored. He looked unsettled, as if something long ignored had shifted, as if this was not, in fact, the end. And the Hall of Embers, so certain only moments ago, seemed to hold its breath. Chapter 2. The Silence After Shame. The doors of the Hall of Embers closed without ceremony. They did not slam. They did not echo. They simply shut. Elira Vane stood on the far side of them as the sound of the court vanished, cut off as cleanly as breath after a plunge into water. Two guards flanked her, their armor quiet, their steps measured. They did not touch her. They did not need to. The corridor beyond the hall was long and narrow, carved from the same dark stone, lit by evenly spaced braziers that burned low and steady. This passage was not meant for spectacle. It was meant for removal. It did not lead out of the palace. It led out of relevance. She walked forward when they gestured. Not quickly, not slowly. Each step rang faintly against the floor, too loud in the hush. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her shoulders, not as pain, but as density, as gravity. Everyone had seen. That was the truth she could not avoid. The nobles, the scribes, the servants who pretended not to listen, the guards who stood like statues, the advisors who nodded as her life was folded neatly and set aside. They had seen her accused. They had seen her dismissed. And none of them had spoken for her. Elira kept her gaze forward. She refused to replay the scene in her mind, refused to catalog expressions or imagine what was being whispered now behind the sealed doors. That way lay spirals. That way lay collapse. Instead, she focused on the present. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Her breath was steady, her pulse calm. She had endured. That mattered. At the end of the corridor, the guards stopped. One reached forward and opened a smaller door set into the stone wall. Beyond it lay the outer halls of the palace. Less grand, less guarded, but alive with motion. Proceed, the guard said, his voice neutral. She stepped through. The door closed behind her. For the first time since the judgment, Elira was alone. The formal writ had not yet been delivered. Procedure always lagged behind spectacle. Over the following days, the palace resumed its rhythms as if nothing had occurred, a familiarity that made the waiting worse. Messengers passed with sealed scrolls. Servants flowed along familiar paths. Officials murmured near alcoves, conversations dimming a fraction too late when she passed. She felt it again. Attention. Not overt, not cruel, but unmistakable. She was no longer invisible, and she was no longer welcome. Elira walked on. Her route carried her through the western wing, toward the exit reserved for minor officials and scholars. Not the gate of honor, the gate of function. She had passed through it countless times before. Now every step felt exposed. She did not hurry. Hurrying would look like shame. She did not slow. Slowing would invite comment. So she walked as she always had, upright, composed, purposeful. Her thoughts turned practical. She would need to leave the capital by dawn, retrieve her belongings, gather coin enough for travel, enough to disappear. Obscurity might be safer. A place without legacy texts, without councils, without thrones. A place where truth carried no consequence. The idea settled in her chest, not as defeat, but as strategy. She could endure exile. She had endured worse. As days passed, she became aware of it. Not a presence, an absence. The corridor behind her remained empty longer than it should have. When she glanced back, she caught the tail end of motion, a guard stepping away, already turning, as if his purpose had been fulfilled. Watching, not escorting, and not bothering to hide it. She noted it, said nothing. Inside the archive corridor, a junior scribe froze mid-step at the sight of her. "Illyra," he said before he could stop himself. She inclined her head. "Tomas." He swallowed. I heard." "I'm sure you did," she said gently. His voice dropped. "They're saying your name in places you were never meant to reach." Her fingers stilled for half a breath. "Be careful," she said. He nodded quickly, eyes darting down the hall. "Of course." She passed him without another word. Her quarters were small and spare, a narrow bed, a writing desk, shelves lined with copied texts and personal notes she had been permitted to keep. She closed the door and rested her forehead briefly against the wood. Just for a moment. The stillness pressed in. Her hands trembled. Only slightly. She straightened at once. No, not here. Not now. She packed efficiently, clothing folded with care, books chosen with restraint, nothing sealed, nothing forbidden. Only what she could carry without question. The shame lingered, but it did not consume her. It sat heavy and contained. A reminder, not a wound. She had been humiliated, but she had not been undone. Far above, as the days stretched on, in chambers carved directly into the mountain stone, King Aurelian Draveth stood at a tall window overlooking the city. The court had dispersed. Advisors had spoken at length about precedent, order, the necessity of firmness. He had listened. He always listened. Outwardly, nothing had changed. His posture remained composed. His responses measured. His authority unquestioned. Yet something had lodged beneath his composure. A grain of ash in the lungs. He could not stop seeing it. Not her defiance. Not her words. Her restraint. She had stood alone before the throne and absorbed judgment without spectacle. No pleading, no performance, no appeal to sympathy. And when dismissed, she had walked away as if she still owned herself. That unsettled him, not because it was admirable, but because it was rare. Chapter 3. When Power Begins to Watch. By the next morning, Illyra Vane had convinced herself that the worst was behind her. The night had passed without interruption. No guards at her door. No summons pulled her from sleep. The palace had remained quiet, almost indifferent. When dawnlight crept through the narrow window of her quarters, she took it as confirmation of what she wanted to believe. The humiliation had been public. The consequences? Private. That was how these things usually ended. She rose early and dressed with care. Her satchel sat packed by the door, the sealed order resting on the desk beside it. Unread, folded, as if neglecting it might weaken its authority. She told herself she would resolve it on her way out, that someone had delayed the paperwork, that the crown had already moved on. She believed this because believing it allowed her to function. Illyra stepped into the corridor as palace staff began their routines. The air smelled of fresh ash and oil. Bells marked the first hour. Life resumed its rhythm. She joined it. Her plan was simple: retrieve her travel papers, collect the stipend owed to dismissed officials, leave through the western gate before the city fully woke, disappear. The first interruption came near the stairwell. A guard stepped into her path, not blocking, simply present. "Your destination?" he asked. "The clerk's office." He studied her a moment longer than courtesy required, then stepped aside. "Proceed." No one touched her. Not yet. Whatever forces were moving, they were restrained. She descended the stairs, aware of the echo of her steps. At the clerk's office, the senior clerk accepted her writ with stiff fingers. He scanned it twice, then set it aside. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Your stipend has been deferred." "Deferred?" Alira repeated. "Pending review." "By whom?" "Higher authority." Her chest tightened. "I was ordered to leave by dawn." The clerk hesitated. "Circumstances have changed." A provisional hold had been placed on her dismissal, issued under royal authority. She nodded once and left before the words sharpened on her tongue. Outside, the inner courtyards buzzed with activity. Messengers crossed paths. Officials spoke in low clusters. Guards stood at intervals that felt deliberate. This time, she did not tell herself it was coincidence. By midday, she tested the western gate. The gate captain examined her request and shook his head. "No authorization." "I don't require authorization," Alira said evenly. "I've been dismissed." "You've been ordered not to depart," he replied, eyes flicking briefly toward the wall. "By whom?" "That's not for me to say." She stepped back. The truth settled. She was not being delayed. She was being watched. The order to leave had not been revoked, only suspended. High above the courtyards, King Aurelian Draveth observed the city through a lattice of carved stone. Reports had arrived steadily since dawn, sparse, precise. Where she walked, where she paused, what she tested. He had not ordered her confined. He had not ordered her harmed. He had simply asked to know. And now he did. "She's calm," Captain Ryden said behind him. "Methodical." "She understands patterns," Aurelian replied. "That's why she's dangerous." "Or useful," Ryden offered. Aurelian did not answer. As the day wore on, Elira stopped trying to leave. By late afternoon, every path out of the capital had closed, not with chains, but with procedure. Clerks deferred, guards delayed, orders shifted, invisible walls. She returned to her quarters and sat at the desk, hands folded, thoughts sharp. This was not the council. They would have acted more bluntly, not more cant alone. Which left only one source: the Dragon King. The realization did not frighten her. It clarified. She was not collateral. She was a variable. Someone wasn't reacting to her. Someone was studying her. A knock sounded. She rose and opened the door. 2 guards stood there. Between them, a woman in dark formal robes. "Elira Vane," the woman said. "I am Magistrate Selth." Elira inclined her head. "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Am I free to decline?" The pause answered her. She reached for her cloak. They escorted her not to a cell, but to a secured residence within palace grounds. Clean, quiet, guarded. A place designed to hold someone without naming it: confinement. Rules were explained. Movement restricted. Visitors prohibited. Protection, they called it. Containment. She named it silently. That evening, unrest reached the upper halls. Nobles demanded audience. Voices sharpened. She exposed fractures. She embarrassed the council. She must be silenced. Aurelian listened from behind closed doors. They were not wrong about the risk. They were wrong about the solution. Later that night, alone, he reviewed the original records, the inconsistencies she had cited. They were real. not conclusive, but real enough. The humiliation had been premature and dangerous. Allowing it had shifted attention, not away from the truth, but toward her. A report arrived before the night fully settled. A servant had attempted to enter the secured residence with a vial concealed in linen. The substance had been identified quickly: odorless, slow-acting, fatal. He had been stopped. The servant claimed ignorance, and no command trail could be proven. This was no longer pressure. This was assassination. And someone, somewhere, had decided the consequences were acceptable, not to silence her quietly, but to end the matter before it could spread. Aurelian stood in silence. That line had been crossed. From this moment, he said, Elira Vane answers directly to the crown. If the attempt had succeeded, the truth would have died with her, and no decree could restore it. No council, no intermediaries, his authority alone. As the order was issued, the truth settled fully. The humiliation had not ended the matter. It had ignited it. And now, power was no longer watching from a distance. It was engaged. Chapter 4: The Price of Standing Still. By the third day, silence was no longer an option. The council chamber filled before dawn, voices already sharp with impatience. Candles burned low along the long stone table, their flames wavering as nobles and officials took their seats. Wax, ink, and restrained anger thickened the air. Elira Vane's name was spoken before the doors even closed. She remains within palace walls, Chancellor Morkant said, his tone clipped. That alone invites speculation. Speculation becomes unrest, Lord Halvorin added, fingers drumming against the table. The city notices when someone is removed publicly and then not removed at all. And now there are rumors, another voice said. Whispers of guards doubling their watch, of arrests made quietly. Morkant's jaw tightened. Security measures were necessary. They're being noticed, Halvorin pressed, and people are asking why. When people ask why, another added, they invent answers. Morkant inclined his head. Her presence undermines authority. The matter must be concluded. Across the table, Captain Ryden stood rigid, arms crossed. Concluded how? Morkant did not answer at once. By final decree, he said at last. The words settled heavily. Execution was not spoken. It did not need to be. At the head of the chamber, King Aurelian Draveth listened without interruption. He sat straight-backed, hands folded, his expression calm enough to irritate them. He recognized this moment. An ultimatum. Your Majesty, Morkant continued, turning fully toward the throne, your restraint has been noted. But restraint, prolonged, becomes indecision, and indecision weakens rule. Aurelian lifted his gaze. You believe my silence is weakness. I believe it is being interpreted as such, Morkant replied carefully. Whether or not that was your intent. Murmurs followed. She has become a symbol, Halvorin said, to scholars, to dissenters. And now, another added, to those willing to act. The implication was clear. Aurelian's fingers tightened. Envoys have begun asking questions, a voice continued, and servants have been detained. The palace feels unsettled. Then remove the symbol, someone said flatly. Aurelian exhaled slowly. You argue for order, he said, yet you propose to achieve it through fear. Fear preserves peace, Morkant replied. You know this. Yes, Aurelian said quietly. I do. And he also knew what it consumed. By nightfall, Morkant pressed, this must be resolved, or the council will act, and no one will pretend it was orderly. Not through law, but through precedent, pressure, and irreversible momentum. Silence followed. Aurelian dismissed them with a raised hand, promising a decision before evening. They departed reluctantly, frustration trailing behind them like smoke. When the chamber emptied, Aurelian remained seated. The echoes faded. Only then did he allow himself to think freely. His reign had been built on restraint, on measured response, on systems functioning without his constant interference. That was how stability endured. But restraint, he saw now, had limits. He had allowed the humiliation in the Hall of Embers because it preserved structure. Because intervention would have fractured the council, set precedent, invited chaos. He had told himself it was necessary. And yet, his inaction had placed a target on Elira Vane's back. Not because she had been wrong, but because she had survived. The attempted poisoning had not been meant to kill quietly. It had been meant to warn. Someone had decided procedure was too slow. Standing still had not neutralized danger. It had concentrated it. In the secured residence, Elira felt the shift before anyone spoke a word. The guards outside her door had changed. Their posture sharpened. Their watch tightened. She did not ask why. By midday, Magistrate Selth arrived again. "You should prepare yourself," Selth said. "For what?" Elira asked. "For a decision." Elira nodded. "I assumed as much." "The council is pressing," Selth added quietly. "And the king?" Elira asked. Selth hesitated. "The king is weighing outcomes." That told her everything. Her fate was being debated as a matter of balance, not justice, not truth. Balance. Elira returned to the desk and began to pack again. Slower now, more deliberately. Each garment folded as if she would not return. She did not rage. She did not despair. That did not mean she was untouched. She prepared. If exile restored calm, she would accept it. If imprisonment was required, she would endure it. She would not beg. That much she owed herself. As she secured the satchel, an unwelcome thought surfaced. They had not tried to silence her with words. They had moved past that. The knock came in the late afternoon. Not from a guard. From the king. Chapter 5. What Power Finally Chose. The Hall of Embers filled before the bells finished ringing. Word had spread too far, too fast for this to be a quiet conclusion. Nobles in layered silks took their places beside robed officials. Guards lined the walls in full ceremonial armor. Scribes waited with ink poised, ready to record whatever would settle the matter at last. At the center of the hall stood Elira Vane. She was not restrained. She had been allowed to stand alone, exactly where she had stood days before, on the same polished stone floor, beneath the same towering arches, before the same throne. This time, no one whispered. The silence was heavier than sound. Everyone knew what this gathering meant. A final decision. If she was to be erased, it would be done cleanly and publicly. If she was to be spared, it would require justification strong enough to withstand the room's scrutiny. Elira felt the weight of their attention, but it no longer cut. She had already been broken here once. There was nothing left for them to take. Her posture was straight. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. She wore the same simple scholar's dress, mended and pressed. Her satchel was gone, taken when she was escorted back into the hall. She did not look at the nobles. She did not look at the council. She looked at the throne. King Aurelian Draveth sat above them all. Still, distant, unmoving. To those watching, it appeared as though he had already chosen order. Chancellor Morcant stepped forward, parchment in hand. "Elira Vane," he announced, his voice echoing to the farthest pillars. "Formerly of the Eastern Archives, you stand before this assembly for final judgment." No accusation followed, no list of crimes. That omission unsettled the room. "Your continued presence within the capital," Morcant continued, "has resulted in unrest, speculation, and risk to the stability of the realm. The council has therefore prepared a decree to resolve the matter." He lifted the parchment. Red wax gleamed at its edge. Several nobles exhaled in quiet relief. Finality. Illyra felt the moment settle deep in her bones. This was it. She did not brace herself. She simply accepted. Morkant turned slightly toward the throne. Your Majesty, the decree awaits your acknowledgement. All eyes lifted. The hall held its breath. King Aurelian did not move. The silence stretched, long enough to become uncomfortable, long enough for doubt to creep in. Illyra wondered briefly if this was how it would end. Not with cruelty, but with indifference. Then Aurelian stood. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. The dragon throne loomed behind him as he descended the obsidian steps, one at a time, until he stood level with the assembly. He did not take the decree. He did not signal for Morkant to proceed. Instead, he turned his gaze outward, sweeping across the hall. I will speak, he said. The words were quiet. They silenced everything. This matter, Aurelian said, has been framed as a question of stability, of order, of containment. He paused, letting the terms hang. I disagree. A ripple stirred, quickly smothered. Aurelian turned to Illyra. For the first time since she had been brought back into the hall, he addressed her directly. Illyra Vane, he said, his voice carrying without force. You are humiliated in this room. The words struck like a dropped blade. A murmur spread. Not approval, not outrage, recognition. Morkant stiffened. Your Majesty. I am not finished, Aurelian said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I allowed it, he continued. I allowed a public dismissal to proceed without intervention. I allowed silence to stand where leadership should have spoken. He turned back to the room. That was my failure. Unease deepened. I believed restraint would preserve order, Aurelian said. Instead, it concentrated danger. He faced Morkant fully. The unrest you fear did not arise from her presence, he said. It arose from my refusal to choose. The parchment trembled slightly in Morkant's grasp, and he did not try to steady it. Illyra Vane did not ask for protection, Aurelian continued. She did not beg for mercy. She did not incite rebellion. His gaze moved across the assembly. She endured. Some nobles shifted. Others remained rigid, faces unreadable. And because she endured, he said, others sought to remove her, not to preserve peace, but to erase discomfort. A pause. I will not allow that. The council, Morkant began. The council advises, Aurelian said evenly. I rule. The words settled with finality. The dragon crown does not require consensus in matters of correction. He turned to the scribe nearest the throne. Record this. Quills scratched, urgent and uneven. By my authority as Dragon King, Aurelian declared, the decree prepared by the council is nullified. A sharp intake of breath swept the hall, not all of it in relief. Illyra Vane is neither prisoner nor exile, Aurelian continued. She is under the direct protection of the crown. A pause. Not hidden. Not silenced. Not as a subject to be contained, he said, but as a citizen whose dignity was compromised by my silence. He turned to her again. This protection is not imposed, he said. It is offered. Choice settled into the room. Illyra stepped forward one pace. I will not be hidden, she said. Aurelian inclined his head. Nor will you be. I will not be used to soothe fear, she continued, nor to decorate power. You will not. I will not be silent to preserve comfort. Aurelian studied her, just long enough for the hall to feel the risk in it. Then speak, he said, and accept the cost of being heard. She met his gaze. I already have. Then she inclined her head. I accept. Aurelian turned back to the assembly. Illyra Vane will be restored to her position within the archives, he said. Morkant's breath caught. With full access to legacy records. That landed first. Then, she will also serve as independent auditor to the crown. A sharper stir followed. That role does not exist, someone said under their breath. It does now, Aurelian replied. Her appointment is provisional, he continued, bound by charter, subject to public review at the end of 1 year. A warning, not a shield. Her findings will be recorded, he said, not softened, not erased, and not protected, by me or by this council. Silence followed. She will answer to the truth she uncovers. And so would everyone else. The council will adapt, Aurelian said, as it always has. He stepped away from the throne, not in retreat, but to stand beside Illyra, close enough to be seen, distant enough to remain proper. A declaration without spectacle. The hall bowed, not all at once. Some hesitated, some bowed late, a few did not bow at all. Illyra noticed who. When the hall finally emptied, Illyra stood near the great doors. There was a moment, Aurelian said quietly, when I almost chose silence again. She did not look away. I know. I was afraid, he admitted. Not of you, of what choosing would expose. It will cost you, she said, not as warning but recognition. He inclined his head. And you. They parted without vows, without promises, but not unchanged. Beyond the Hall of Embers, somewhere out of sight, someone was already deciding how to make this choice hurt. Because power that corrects itself does not go unchallenged, especially by those it exposes. And neither does the woman who made it necessary.